In the previous video, we introduced many concepts and specific examples of HTML code related to style. In this video, we take it a step further. We generalize the text markup elements by introducing the span and div elements. We also introduce the HR element and demonstrate how to make data in columns line up. In the previous video, we introduced half a dozen elements that modified the appearance of text. B for bold, I for italic, and so on. But that's pretty limiting, considering all the possible combinations of style properties we might want. Then we introduced the concept of class, a way to combine multiple style properties under one user-created name. Now we introduce the span element to use the class capabilities to generalize text markup for strings of text within a larger string. The span element, its purpose is to indicate formatting for a substring within a text string. The syntax is span, class equals, and in one or more classes, and then the text that this spans, and then end span. The start tag and end tag are required. The quotes are not required if there's only one value for the class attribute. Other attributes may be specified, but it's not generally done. Also, event handlers are allowed, but again, not generally done. Now you can see how this generalizes the earlier markup elements. If you define a class of bold as .bold and the block declaration font weight bold, then in your HTML body, you can code things like paragraph, this is the span, class equals bold, end of the world, end span, end paragraph. Now, it's clearly simpler to code paragraph, this is the B, end of the world, /B, end paragraph. But with span, I can assign much more complex, useful properties. Recall that in the first lesson, we pointed out that elements can be nested, but they cannot overlap. So while span cannot cross element boundaries, still, it is very useful within elements. The div element, its purpose is to delineate divisions within a web page. It's also a tool for grouping multiple consecutive elements to assign common style properties. The syntax, we start with a header, div, class equals classes, and then the nested elements and end div. The start tag and the end tag are both required. You don't have to have the class attribute if you're just trying to nest structures. Attributes other than class and event handlers are generally not coded for this element. So here's an example. Div class equals into bold 14. Then the first paragraph says this paragraph will be indented based on the into class definition and probably have 14 bold type. And the second paragraph has the same characteristics. So you see the div element includes both of these and passes its properties on. It is not uncommon to nest div elements within each other, and sub-elements carry down their style attributes. And the usefulness of this will become clearer in the next video. Now, the HR element. Its purpose is to place a horizontal rule across the current page. This provides a visual clue that there is a change in topic or level of detail or intent at this point. Syntax, start tag, HR, possibly some attributes. The start tag is required and an end tag is forbidden. Usually you don't code attributes, but you might use ID, style, or class. Event handlers, usually none. So here's an example. We have a P element following as a default HR tag. Notice the end of the paragraph, and there's our HR. Next is a paragraph following as a modified HR tag, and here we have an HR tag with style equals, and we set a color and margin left and right 25%, and border style and border width. And here's how you might see that. The first HR takes the default, so it covers the whole width of the screen. The second HR only covers part because of the margin parameters, and it's thicker because of the border parameters. We discuss the margin and border style properties in the next video. Lining up text. Many times, for appearance's sake, you want to line up text in columns or otherwise group items in some kind of alignment. And there's just a few options to make this work using HTML. You could use list-related tags, which we talk about in a later session. Or you could use tables, also discussed in a later lesson. You can use tabs, but that's not really good for HTML, since different browsers render tab settings differently and users can change tab settings. You could use preformatted elements. Some problems can arise when inserting references and links, and we'll look at that in a second. And then you can use style properties in style or class elements and use a non-proportional font, a monospace font, so every character is the same width, such as Courier. Some problems can arise, but we'll examine that shortly. So when you work with non-preformatted elements, you need to use a monospace font, such as Courier, and use non-breaking space character entity references, where you might normally put spaces, to ensure even spacing and thus proper alignment. For example, suppose we have this. I have a style element, and I put detail, and its block descriptor is font size 10 point, font family Courier. So that gives me a monospace font in this class called detail. And in the body, I've got some miscellaneous stuff, and then here's a paragraph with class equals detail. And you'll see what I'm trying to do in the paragraph here is have a header for room and the capacity of the room, and then the different various rooms, and over here the number of people that they can take. And if I put it through the browser, it comes up this way. Well, you see the problem. The spaces between room and capacity have been reduced to one space, as has the spaces between rooms and their capacities. So now we'll use some amper NBSP strings to get the alignment. It's pretty much a trial and error thing because amper NBSP semicolon takes up 6 characters in the HTML, but only 1 in the rendering. After some trial and error, I ended up with this. So we have our B element, room, and then here's a whole bunch of non-breaking spaces, and then over here is capacity, new line. And then here I have my A elements and different non-breaking space amounts between them, and it displays this way, which is what we were after. Technically, you should probably change the spaces between board and room and A and so on to also be NBSP, but this seems to be working. If you don't like lines to be too long in your editor, you can code things this way. So I have my A tag, meeting room B, and then each non-breaking space on a separate line. And this works, although for some reason it seems to require a different number of non-breaking spaces using different coding styles. Finally, if you use pre-elements but you want to include links, say, then you might end up with something like this. Now here I've got a preformatted block of places and the parking lot, the garden office, and so forth, and again their capacity. But on the computer room entry, I've got a link to the picture, an A tag, and the exercise room also has a picture for it. So to make these lined up, I inserted regular spaces. Definitely takes some trial and error to get it right. Another good reason to test, especially in multiple browsers. Testing and debugging are the subjects of a later video, but you can probably get going anytime. So with the example we have, we ended up with what you see here. So for this short session, we generalized the text format markup elements by introducing the span and div elements. We provided another tool for giving visual information about a page content using the HR element, and we demonstrated some techniques for getting data to line up in columns when necessary. Coming up, in the next video, We examined the fundamentals of page layout using some new style properties and looking at the HTML block formatting model. See you there.